Welcome to Owl Talk, brought to you by Rice Digital Learning and Strategy, exploring digital education in the 21st century. Joining us today is Kathleen Perley, lecturer in management communication and AI advisor to the dean at Rice University's Jones Graduate School of Business. She is the instructor of our newly launched asynchronous professional development course for Rice faculty called Teaching with AI at Rice, From Curiosity to Confidence. Thanks so much, Kathleen, for joining us today and carving out some time to share your insights and expertise. I'm excited.
No, thank you so much for having me.
You are our first guest, and
lots of pressure.
You're talking about such an interesting topic that so many faculty, staff, and students across higher education are kind of grappling with, and so you've been deemed our expert. How does that feel? What do you think about being Rice's expert on AI?
Not only is it an honor, it is a lot of pressure, right? I think you look at this landscape and what is coming, and a lot of things we don't really have the answers. There isn't a blueprint. So a lot of it is experimentation, it's testing, it's being open to those new ideas, having those difficult conversations and really making sure that's part of that fabric so that we can really think about this thoughtfully. So I love having the honor in terms of guiding, but I also tell people it's a lot of, making sure that we're asking the right questions, doing the right testing, really exploring things in the right way, not necessarily being the one with all of the answers because it is changing so fast and I definitely don't have all of them.
Well, first, before we get started in the actual AI and the course, tell us a little bit about yourself, your educational journey, how you got to Rice today. I went through sort of the course as a member, just kind of looking at the modules and learned a lot about you. But for our audience out there, tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got to Rice University.
I was never what I would call a high-achieving student in any aspect of my career, especially in my early academic career. So I was diagnosed with both ADHD and dyslexia very early on, actually to the point where my college counselor suggested not going to college initially. But I have a little bit of a stubborn streak in me. And so I really sought out to understand why my brain works differently than many others or how the traditional curriculum is structured in many schools, and started focusing on linguistics. I've been really good at pattern recognition, maybe not the best at, explaining my ideas in a way that's thoughtful or curated that allows for nonlinear thinkers to kind of jump on as easily. But that really spurred my interest in this space, is really a deep personal understanding of why I was different in a world that was built for people who think very linearly and very, step by step. And after doing that linguistics work at TCU in Fort Worth, as we talked about, a fellow Horned Frog here, I studied and did a Fulbright research grant in Madrid looking at phonetics and phonology and second language acquisition and how we could utilize that aspect of language processing to really help advance and increase the speed at which another individual learns a second language. So came home from that program. I'm a native Houstonian, but both my parents are New Yorkers. My mom's actually from Bayonne, so the stereotypes you think of your classic New Yorker, she was 100% that. And I moved home and I had about 8 months before my PhD program started in linguistics. And she was, if you live in this house, you have to have a job. And so I got a job at a digital marketing startup, and I was there able to really identify the parallelisms between language coding and actual coding and schema markup and things of that nature. And so that's really where I began my journey, even heavier on building AI and ML processes for identifying propensity modeling for healthcare, so helping them reach prospective patients that really needed them. And I had my own company that I started in 2013. So I've since sold that firm to 2 private equity companies, and I'm now getting back to my first love of where I always wanted to be from the get-go, which is doing research, working with other people who are insatiably curious, and really hoping to open the doors for non-traditional thinkers to really help shape what AI might look like in our world.
Yeah, and I think you said a lot in that that aligns with AI today, right? The pattern recognition, the stubbornness of trying to figure these things out, the intellectual curiosity to keep thinking. All of those things resonate with AI today. But as you were navigating maybe your Fulbright and interested in your doctoral studies, what were you thinking in terms of you were going to do with these degrees eventually? Was it that I wanted to get an AI? Certainly it wasn't, because at that time it wasn't around, right?
It
What
was not
your
paying
goal?
well at that time. It wasn't a very fruitful career. Now, looking at some of the salaries that you're seeing at OpenAI and Meta, I mean, they're on the same level as some of the Kobe Bryants of the world and professional athletes. So in hindsight, probably if I knew that going into it, I probably would have focused more on that. But what I really wanted to focus on was the mapping of language and getting a PhD and actually teaching in that space, and really wanting to tie linguistics more to the biomedical science side of things. So looking at more audiology, anatomy, and physiology as well. So that was my goal. I wanted to be the cool professor on campus that just got to be a full-time nerd. And initially my mom said, that sounds wonderful, but you need a job in the meantime. And so now it feels like I'm coming full circle and I'm being able to achieve that dream.
And so are you the cool professor on campus?
I don't know. I'd say I don't think I've quite gotten there yet. I did get a couple invites to Valhalla. So I think I'm maybe making some progress.
Yeah.
But, the students have been amazing. I bring a lot of real world experience, having built models, agents, consulted with companies. And so I have that experience. I've done a lot of internal teaching at organizations, but not used to Canvas or how certain things operate. So, it's been a little bit of trial and error, but everyone's been so gracious. And so I'm hoping one day I'll be able to achieve that cool professor on campus status.
In progress, right?
Yeah, in progress, for sure.
So tell me how you landed at Rice. So you've sold the business, you're out there, you've consulted, you've done this work. How did you get to Rice? I mean, do you go online and see, hey, they're hiring, or how did you get to Rice University?
So interestingly enough, a fellow former Rice MBA alum, Allison Lamy Knight, is a good friend and mentor of mine. She had a company called Rebellion Photonics. So they utilize computer vision to help identify different types of gas leaks within refineries, pipelines, things of that nature. So she had a background in computer vision, which is obviously an aspect of AI. And so Barb actually approached Allison about teaching this course. And Allison said, I will only teach it if I can bring Kathleen along, because she's more well-versed in the large language models, the natural language processing. I'm more focused on kind of more of the computer vision side, and I've been out of it for a little bit. And so we partnered up for this kind of adjunct spring course it was about a year and a half ago. And I just fell in love with it. I really enjoyed working with students. We had about 89 students in our first class, and it was incredible. I had one student that still sticks with me to this day. And she, after the first day of class, came up to me and was like, I'm not sure I really should be in this class. I don't know what an API is. I am not technical at all. I think I might drop. And I said, please do not drop. This class is not meant for technical coders. Don't let the language intimidate you. Please stick with it. And she did. And she ended up being one of my star students. She ended up actually leading the AI council at her company based on some of the material that we were able to take from my class and implement. And she sent me the sweetest note after the class had ended, telling me not only was it one of her favorite classes, but she mentioned that I helped change the trajectory of her career.
And we've all experienced it as a student, those special moments with faculty. And so when you're in a position to be able to guide or re-emphasize or just kind of lead, it is refreshing. And that's why we all do the work that we do. And so you're really leading the innovation and conversations about AI. So how do you think AI is disrupting higher education, and why is it important that, as a profession, we respond, and should we embrace AI? And I know those are some tough questions, right? But your thoughts as someone who's been an industry expert, but also who's leading those conversations here on our campus.
I think, One of the reasons why I really want to encourage faculty to adopt AI is a couple reasons. One is to help remove some of the barriers for students like myself who have always leaned on technology. I remember in lower school, and part of the things I was trained on with my tutors was actually how fast I could find words in a dictionary so I could learn how to spell them. A dying art and skill set, but maybe one day will come in handy. And I remember when the electronic little handheld dictionary was created, and I had one of those, and that really helped me. And so I've always seen technology as a way to unlock opportunity and thoughts for myself. And I think if you're not from that background or you don't have those experiences, it can be intimidating. And what I really want faculty to focus on is that this isn't meant to replace them, but we really need to start thinking about how can we use AI to create personalized learning paths for students who have different experiences or backgrounds or native languages, as well as how do we really think about this as a way to reduce some of the administrative work on faculty to really allow them to spend more time with their students. I would say 9 times out of 10, no faculty I've ever talked to is like, oh man, I'm so pumped to write my syllabus or rewrite the questions for this exam, right? They are interested in the engagement and really creating unique learning experiences. And this really helps create that space for them.
What aspect, if you had to, take into consideration your colleagues and just faculty writ large in higher ed, what could you pinpoint is in large part their reservation into incorporating AI and or leveraging it for, like you said, their workload and or innovation in the classroom?
I think it really stems from a misunderstanding of what AI is capable of. Oftentimes when you first talk to anyone in faculty, one of their first when you talk about AI, their first go-to is cheating, right? Is AI going to be used to help my students cheat and not actually learn? And I think there is a balance, right? You need as a faculty member to really figure out how do you maintain the intellectual curiosity, the integrity of truly understanding the foundational frameworks, and really thinking as AI and prompting more as part of your pedagogy in terms of asking further questions and exploring those ideas even further. And so, I think most faculty, once they start to understand different ways the technology can be used and not just used in terms of generating an output that could be an answer, but could really be used to help explore ideas deeper, to help create more meaningful understanding for a student or a group of students, I think they start to shift their mindset.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great segue into the course, right? We really want to thank Rice University leadership, the president, the provost, our associate provost for digital learning, and really pushing the AI to the forefront of discussion, be it the strategic plan and or initiatives that we're rolling out across the university. And one of those is the creation of the course From Curiosity to Confidence. Can you tell us the journey that you're hoping faculty will take and experience once they actually enroll in the course and move from curiosity to confidence with AI?
I think really one thing I find time and time again is AI and some of the language that's used can be very intimidating. So my first goal is to remove the intimidation layer, right? To help them understand not necessarily the ins and outs of every single neural network and weights and how we look at bias and all of that as we build models, but really understand what is the language that everyone is using and really equating to understanding how this all works. So in my course, I talk about, an AI model is very similar to driving a car, or how you actually build a model from the ground up is really like making a cocktail, and the ingredients are very similar to data. And when you have that understanding, right, if you're making a margarita and your data is your ingredients, if you have bad tequila, you're making one margarita, you're gonna have a really bad hangover. Now, if you're making a giant batch of margaritas and you have, maybe 12 bottles of tequila that are being used and one is bad, oftentimes what happens is you get a dilution, right? It's unnoticeable. And that's what these models are doing from a data perspective. And so we talk about what types of data they're ingesting. And so you have that understanding. So not the ins and outs in terms of how the models specifically scrape and index and merge to different vectors, not at that depth, but really understanding how they work so they can identify where the potential breaking points are or where the critical reasoning and thinking need to occur to ask the right questions.
So in the course, you discuss differentiating AI from like traditional automation, which some people just believe is the exact same thing. AI is automation. Why is it important for this distinction and for faculty to understand that in the design of a course or leveraging AI in the development of the curriculum?
I think it's important to understand that distinction because it's not as rote in terms of you put in A, you get out B. I really think it's important that faculty and any user of AI really sees this as a thought partner and pushing it to challenge their thinking or their objectives. I oftentimes tell models, because I talk to mine more verbally than typing, because I'm obviously a bad speller being dyslexic, but I'll say, don't agree with me. Stop glazing me. Tell me why I'm wrong. Challenge me. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think that, in an academic inquiry, we talk about the idea of asking really good questions. And if we could correlate like the AI model and the scientific design behind it towards an academic approach, I think they might be more receptive to it, right? The idea that prompt engineering is really about asking the right questions and being intuitive to understand the output, which is similar to academic inquiry when you do research, right?
Exactly.
And so there's a lot of correlation there, but oftentimes it's automatically distilled down to automation. You put something in and you get the paper out.
Absolutely. It's not an answer engine, and it shouldn't be treated as such. And I think that's where, when we think about what we teach at universities and in higher ed and how that might shift, content knowledge and memorization is not as needed as it once was, right? It's not about memorizing certain formulas and understanding how they work. It's really about, do you have the framework and understanding of what the principles are and how they work? And can you ask the right question to intelligent models? And can you be critical and identify what are some potential gaps in the reasoning that model might have made that make that answer not correct? And that's where that shift is really, I think, you're starting to see and start to see occur.
Yeah. And so, when we talk about faculty taking the course, and hopefully they'll understand more about these things that you're talking about as they navigate through the course, I think essentially for those out there who are thinking about the course, their question is, okay, what are the practical ways that after taking this course, I can literally take AI and do some of these immediately intuitive things into my classroom to help teaching and learning for courses, course preparation, discussions, learning outcomes, things that really resonate as they see as pragmatic solutions to their work balance, their workload, the demand of all that a university requires from tenure track faculty.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, we talk about very specific prompts. We give them very explicitly in the course itself so you can use them and test them in terms of how to build out a course syllabus. How to identify opportunities for further engagement or new ideas in terms of projects or assignments that kind of push the traditional bounds of what we know. How to upload your current curriculum and ask, how do I modify this for somebody who's a non-native speaker or who have a learning difference? One of the other things that I think is really valuable that you'll learn in this course that's super practical is oftentimes I find, when you're working with certain faculty, they're utilizing cases from 10 years ago. And so using AI to say, here are the principles I'm trying to teach. Can you help me identify news stories and things that are out there that are more current in the last year or two that kind of help exemplify this philosophy or this framework that I'm trying to teach? I think it's really important because then you can really help frame the conversation in a way that makes a lot more sense for your students, or even tying it into a background that you may not be familiar with. Obviously I teach in the business school, so I have everything from healthcare to finance to consulting to oil and gas, and I don't know the first thing about petroleum engineering, right? And so being able to use AI to say, help me frame different ways that a petroleum engineer might be able to think about this is a great way. And one of my favorite things that we talk about and that I use constantly is a tool called Notebook LM. And so the ability to find research that's relevant to what you're teaching or what you're interested in and allow it to generate a podcast for you, focused on it and directed on specific aspects of it, so that when you go to read the paper, you kind of have that first understanding of where to look and what to think through.
Which then leads to, are we producing students that are prepared for this new industry of AI? And I know Rice has launched a bachelor's degree in AI, and there are conversations about other possible AI-focused degrees. But what is your take on our universities across the United States in a position to produce individuals with the skill set of exactly what you're saying, with what curriculum we have today?
I think it's why there's this need to lean into it, right? If you look at some of the studies and the research, individuals who have AI skill sets are 70% more likely to get hired, and they are garnering about a 56% wage premium compared to last year even, which was about 25%. And so when you think about that, it's not about computer engineers and AI, ML, DevOps, and things of that nature. It's really about how do you bring the two worlds of strategy and this technology together too. And so I think there's a huge opportunity and need for this combined leader within organizations, whether it's in business or within respective fields, where you're able to combine those two fields. And oftentimes when I work with different clients and businesses and organizations, one thing that I find that correlates highly with success of AI implementation in terms of true ROI benefit is having the CEO or the strategic leader involved in guiding and orchestrating the AI implementation, not delegating and treating it like a technology rollout. And so it is a skill set that is going to have to be developed and fostered, because you need to be able to bridge both worlds.
How do people who are either current students and or faculty or just people out in industry who are thinking about engaging in AI as a career, trajectory post-graduation or maybe coming back for a degree, how do those people who don't have a typical background in computer science, how do they navigate this world of being introduced to AI and conceivably understanding it, where they get the skill set and they're better prepared to be as competitive in the marketplace as those that are computer scientists, developers, ops?
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at Claude Code or Windsurf, that just got acquired by Meta. Replit is another one where you don't really need to know how to code. You can code in the English language, which is a code into all of itself, right? As a linguist, obviously, I have a passion for it. And you talk to any of the leaders in this space, and they will tell you the most valuable coding language to learn today is English, right? So you possess the power. You have the capabilities within. It's about really unleashing them and building some resilience to really focus on experimentation, testing, and really thinking through the kind of back end, like, cause and effect of everything and how that might look. And if you put forward another hypothesis, I actually find some of my best, what I'll call AI technical strategists, if you will, are not coders. They're people who have a deep understanding of a specific industry and know enough about the technology to be dangerous. And those are the people who, and I joke because I audited a logic class in college and fell in love with it. And so I took logic 1, 2, and 3 and TA'd and did all of it. And my professor was like, you should be a lawyer. And I was like, great. Went and worked at a law firm. I was like, this is terrible. I just love logic, right? And that's what a lot of this technology is if this, then that, and really creating the structure. I mean, you oftentimes, especially as we move into the AI agent world, right, it goes from prompt engineering to context engineering, right? So what is the system prompt? What are the personas? What are the personas? What's the personality look like?
What's the audience? What's the
What is their knowledge documentation? How much knowledge do you want to give them? Oftentimes you'll find there's a breaking point. If you give it too much knowledge, it will start to get worse. The model will start to form kind of at a lower standard. And so it's really, I think even faculty have this huge opportunity to be a part of this conversation, because when you think about AI agents, it's about how do you build a structure to teach and learn, which is something that we all do all the time.
Right. And so if there are people out there who are concerned about like the human empathy and the loss of it because of AI, how can AI enhance and not replace the human element, but things like empathy, creativity, and critical thinking that faculty may be able to integrate into their classrooms?
That's a tough one, right? It's something I always tell my students, if you're not having at least, a couple, 3 to 4 sleepless nights in my course, I'm not doing my job, right? I joke, I taught undergrad class, and I use the example of Google Maps or MapQuest. And they had no concept of what MapQuest was.
Me either. I'm too young.
And so I was like, well, we were like pirates running around the city with a piece of paper trying to figure out where we were going.
Turn left.
And so
while you're driving.
Right. And so, some people could have argued that would have changed, the ability for spatial recognition and understanding of where things are. Right. Or, I use the example of a phone tree in terms of how we think about a mixture of experts within certain types of models. And they had no concept of it. And so you really have to find that balance where the students are really seeing this technology, or any individual who's using it, as a way to explore ideas and enhance curiosity and critical thinking, because you don't want that muscle to atrophy. And it's one of the challenges as these models, there's been such a push. And, when I first started teaching, the average model had about a 3% hallucination rate, which you can equate to error. Now it's below 1%. It's actually harder to be critical of something that's at, less than 1% than if it was wrong 30% of the time. And so one of the first things I actually do with my students, and I recommend it with even the companies I work with, is have them generate a written output of AI in their job role and how it will impact it. And they have to take that output from the model and put it into a Word doc and then redline it. And really start to understand not only where are the shortcomings, but where it's successful, and what are some of the nuances that they need to maintain an eye for as they continue to use the tool.
And as this becomes more available and more adopted by faculty, and I would argue with no data, but with a gut feeling, and my dissertation chair would always say, Daniel, you can't produce and publish your gut, so you need to have data. But my gut would say that more than 70% of the students in today's institutions are adept at using AI, maybe not at the level that you're describing, but for some thought partnership and some initial writing for their papers. So when we think about the students of today, and they're already embracing this and seeing this as kind of additive to their learning and development, and then we see a resistance traditionally from higher education writ large, right? How do those two intersect? And when the discussion of ethics comes up, right? Because there's always this discussion about ethics and AI. What is your take on regulation and ethics with AI, specifically with faculty and student learning?
I think first and foremost, you have to really figure out what the objectives are of teaching, and what do you want them to accomplish? Is it to memorize and regurgitate? Or is it to truly understand and know how to critically think and challenge assumptions within certain areas of kind of academia? And that might mean you have to change how you test, right? Do we shift to more of a conversation, presentation, dialogue kind of format? And so as it pertains to kind of the issues around ethics and responsible AI use and regulations around it, I think, one thing that I always lean on is the best answer we have today is AI literacy, because the more people who understand how this technology works, both the benefits and the peril, we're able to be a part of the conversation and how these decisions are made. If you want to play possum, then you don't get to be a part of that conversation. And right now, my goal is to help increase that literacy so that we can have many differing ideas and thought leadership on how we approach this. So it is, I do have my sleepless nights when it comes to AI, but this technology is coming. And so the more we can lean into it and start to really understand it and be a part of that conversation, the better.
Yeah. And so we've talked a lot about the faculty. How about our students, right? We know that they're coming in. We know that they're experimenting with AI, and they have some general foundation of its outputs. how do we educate them about what is ethically correct and how to use it as a thought partner and a study partner rather than a content creation for essays or discussion posts? How would you advise the industry on, hey, these are some of the things that we should prepare students for? Because I see that gap. If they come in and no one is educating them about AI, and so all that they've learned is through social media, right? You put in this, you have this topic, you output is the paper, upload it, and there's no identifier that can readily assess whether this is actually ChatGPT or not, or any other AI service. Then we'll go forward. So how do we educate students?
I mean, I think it's important to have the conversation. I think, one of the things I keep seeing time and time again is there's this sense of fear, right? Students are almost too afraid to even touch it because they don't want to even be remotely considered. Like, where does the line drawn in terms of what it can be used for or not? And so they get very nervous and they get very quiet about how they're using it. Versus what I think is very important is having an open discussion. And so one of the things I encourage my students in my AI classes, because it's kind of ironic because I teach them how to use AI to build PowerPoint presentations, how to use AI to build coding environments, how to create synthetic focus groups, right? Things that they oftentimes end up applying in other classes. And
so you're the trouble.
I am the cause of the problems. And so I tell them, listen, you're allowed to utilize AI in my class, obviously, given the course curriculum, but if you want to bring this into your other courses, set up a conversation with your faculty member and explain what you're doing, show them, and why you want to do it. And I think having those conversations are extremely important, and we need to remove, to a certain extent, some of the punitive fear of having that conversation, because some of my students are like, I don't even want to explain this, because then does that put the pretense in their idea that I would do it, even though I wouldn't? And it is pretty obvious, when you have a conversation with somebody, if they really do actually grasp the knowledge, or if they just performed the bare minimum that is required to get the output.
So back to the course, if a faculty were to take the course, what do you think at the end of the course they would be able to accomplish? Some 4 or 5 things that they could take away to say, I can really do these things now that I've completed this course.
I think one of the things they would be able to do is really have a more critical lens on how they evaluate AI output, is one of the big ones. And I think really starting to be able to use it and feel comfortable enough to start exploring and experimenting with some guidelines on how it can be utilized in the classroom, whether it's for the administrative side or for more of the actual creation of interactions or assignments. So a prime example is I actually used AI to help generate a synthetic trial for my students, a mock trial on AI and ethics in healthcare. And so I had it generate depositions, kind of conversations, different roles to really kind of help them navigate this conversation and really help them get to the answer of why this is a challenging conversation versus me just telling him it's a challenging conversation, because it'll change how we think about malpractice law and how we implement these tools. And everyone uses this term human in the loop, but I really think a better representation of that in terms of where we're going is a human over the loop, right? In terms of oversight and what information you give it and delegate to it, and what things you remain as uniquely human.
And so if you were to identify the number one myth about AI that you could just dispel for us that are specifically associated with faculty and then that are specifically associated with students, what would it be?
AI is not cheating.
Wow, that's a big statement.
That's probably my biggest thing, because I think it's very interesting because it's about how do you gain the knowledge, and if you do have a deepening grasp to ask the right questions and think about these topics critically, not the process that you got to get there. And so when I hear faculty say that AI is cheating, it really disheartens me, because you think about students like myself who maybe have a learning disability or a different background, who are struggling to kind of get to that level playing field. And so utilizing AI to help personalize their learning path, I don't think is cheating. And the goal should really be, how do we use this technology to unlock the brilliant ideas that exist in so many people's different minds by removing some of these obstacles, right? You don't have to code anymore. Your ability to start a new business in terms of entrepreneurship is huge, right? The costs and the capital needed has gotten significantly lower because you have the access to AI agents and tools like Replit to build MVPs.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier in our private conversation that you're working on a book, or it's finalized.
Yes.
It's being published. Tell us a little bit about the book and what you're writing about, what you've explored, and why it might be of interest to faculty, staff, or students, or the general public.
Yeah, so the book is called AI Made Simple, Results Made Real, and it's really geared towards non-technical executives, helping them understand the landscape and really developing a strategic framework to application within an organization, and how to think about it. And so, I wrote it in part because a lot of my students asked me throughout my course, like, can you please put this into a book so I can give it to my boss or my coworker so we can start speaking the same language. And also in part to really help myself really fine-tune and really shape what that narrative looks like. The first draft I had, I think, was 400 pages. And so, the first feedback that I got when I was looking at it was, no executive is going to read more than 150 pages, so you got to bring it down and really think about what's most important. And so for me, right, there's this idea of having the answer and true knowledge. And I find that writing for me is a way that helps me really solidify my strategic thinking and approach to certain topics. And so not only was it for the students who wanted to be able to share it with their coworkers and things of that nature, but also for a way for me to really sit and think with, is this the right approach in terms of how we frame it?
So looking at the future, right? AI is going to transform every industry, including higher education. And as someone who studied our industry, disruptions are really what move higher ed forward. We don't just opt in and say, hey, we want to transform,
exactly.
Right? The pandemic pushed us, a lot of us, to thinking about online education in a different way. AI is going to push us into this next iteration of higher ed. What does that iteration look like, and what does Rice look like in 10 years if we as a institution embrace AI thoroughly, from administration, faculty, staff, and students, and transforming our institution? Any insight on what it's going to look like? Yeah,
and I can give you what I'll say, like a very out-of-the-box, crazy idea potentially of how it might look. And one that is more focused on lifelong learning with maybe shorter exposure to academia within specific areas, that really focus not only on building the foundational knowledge, but really shifting from having all the right answers as a leader or as a healthcare professional or as an engineer to how do you ask the right questions? How do you have the base knowledge to challenge some of the assumptions that have been made within industries? And so I think there is going to be a shift to a more lifelong learning environment, where you're maybe getting shorter periods of time, but more hyper-focused on specific areas. And not necessarily about building just knowledge, but because that's accessible through AI and a lot of the tech that's coming out, but really building the foundational knowledge and the curiosity and the critical thinking and the creativity that's really needed to push an industry forward.
Well, you've been just an exciting guest and provided us so many great insights to think about and to challenge us. But any last words to our listeners about AI, your background, the book, your courses, the teaching in AI with AI course here at Rice? Anything else that you'd like to share before we conclude our first podcast?
Yeah, I think one thing that excites me the most, and that I feel like this is our generation's moon landing, if you will, and I so want to be a part of it. And sometimes it's an observer, sometimes it's actually being physically in part of the process. But, I think about AI and these unique challenges in terms of how we rethink org structure, how we rethink processes. And so what I really hope this does is invite faculty and the amazing, incredible thought leaders in their own verticals to join this conversation of what our new world will look like with, understanding the history and what the future looks like and being a part of that and shaping it.
We're creators. We've created science. We've created, solved the world problems, military warfare. We, study complex cancer. As an industry, why would we stay back from AI? That's a great point. And leading those discussions across. We're the marketplace of ideas, right? And so we're better than higher ed to embrace it and kind of challenge and lead it.
Yeah, so I can't wait for the next faculty member to say, hey, I figured out how accounting is going to look in the next 10 years when we start integrating these different types of assets. Because, I have enough of, ways to start thinking about the question, but I definitely don't have that experience to really figure out what that answer might look like.
But working across departments and divisions to solve these curious thoughts is what we're all about.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your expertise. And again, being our first guest, this is an exciting topic, and I'm sure there's going to be much more interaction between Rice Digital Learning and yourself as we launch the course, but also as we continue to navigate AI and our future of learning online, in person, and at Rice University.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
For all of our listeners, you can learn more about Kathleen's course and Rice's approach to digital learning on our website. And from all of us here at Rice Digital Learning, thanks so much for listening to our podcast, and we'll see you on the next episode.